Welcome back to our conversation about medical ethics and artificial intelligence. Once again, we are joined by Dr. Alan Spiro and Dr. Sasha Gutfraind. In part one, we discussed a broader look of medical ethics and AI in healthcare. And in this part, we are going to be discussing more specific problems and solutions with modern AI algorithms. Hello, Dr. Spiro and Dr. Gutfraind. Welcome back.
Hello.
Great to be back.
Nice to be back.
So what is a common mindset that you see among product owners, architects, or users of AI products? And is it the right mindset for AI in medicine?
The mindset is not so much about specific AI issues. The mindset is a very humanistic mindset. There's an old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We tend to favor what we know. We tend to have a bias towards and a confidence in what we can do ourselves. That is true for physicians, and it's true for AI developers. And that confidence often overestimates the reality of what any one of these modalities can do.
Yes, I agree. I think this is really the right kind of sense. Certainly in the data science community, in the AI community, there is a sense of we have this amazing techniques. We are going to change the world, from self-driving cars to self-driving doctors, and it's going to transform and disrupt every field out there. And I think to some extent there's truth in this idea. The techniques are very powerful, and there's a lot of really incredible advances that are happening in this field. However, it's easy to get overboard, and I think that there's a danger here, of course. The danger here that people kind of come into medicine without understanding the rules of the road in medicine, without understanding the domain, and just bring in techniques that are acceptable somewhere else, but might not be really aligned with how medicine thinks and what medicine requires.
I often go back to the fact that the art of medicine is all about managing uncertainty. Artificial intelligence use and machine learning techniques are also all about uncertainty. They multiply each other in a sense and create danger for patients. Whenever you are treating a patient, you are treating the whole patient. You're trying to cure the disease or manage the disease. And you're doing that with data that is based on large populations. That's the nature of medical research and the nature of medicine. In artificial intelligence, you're taking that to a new level because you're using machine learning that can augment the human element quite a bit. You're predicting in ways due to multiple data sources that a human mind can't necessarily manage, but the right kind of algorithms can. But you can get overconfident in those. You're still dealing with uncertainty. You're still dealing with uncertainty in which mistakes or just unanticipated effects can kill somebody. And without that understanding and that humility, it can be quite dangerous as we become over-dependent on these techniques.
Yes, agreed. I like to say that the data doesn't tell you what is not in the data. And this is when we right now live in the world where there's tremendous volumes of millions and millions of health records of different kinds. And when, as a data scientist, when I approach this kind of data set, I feel like I have this omniscience of I know everything that's going on with this patient. Of course, the data is anonymized, but still, there is this patient 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, AB, and I know their medical history, and I can build an algorithm that can predict the next claim, the next admission. But I don't. There is a lot of stuff that doesn't get captured in the data. Every data set has unique gaps. And I have no idea how medicine really works. Why did this patient come to this doctor for this particular procedure? Maybe the patient, like last week, decided not to come for some reason, and so I have no data on that event. We have to realize as data scientists that there's a lot of stuff that's not in our data sets.
So do you think that healthcare professionals have enough input into the design of AI?
I don't. But healthcare professionals are charged and are focused on helping individual patients. So while they do not have enough input into the development of algorithms, I'm not sure that they overtly should, because I don't think that's the best way to use them. I do think that there has to be a way to capture what they do, how they think, in a way that makes sense for building algorithms. For example, we tend to take our data sources from some sort of written record that has field definitions. A claim form has a field definition. An electronic health record actually has a lot that does not have field definitions. So it means that there's not as many data sources. The fact is that the bulk of the interaction that happens between a patient and a doctor or a patient and a nurse practitioner is not recorded. We don't have that in the record. We have things that are supposed to reflect that, but more and more, because of the economics involved, as we get away from paper records where basically doctors wrote a note which was a story, it really ends up in a whole different framework when it's a framework of just trying to capture facts that are more related to what you can bill for than what really happens. So I may be going off on a tangent. I don't think so. I think a lot of the problem is that we don't have the right data sources. The doctors, nurses, they can't be data capture professionals. They have to be healing professionals. And that creates a disjoint between what is needed from them and how active they should be in the actual process.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, there is, from what I've seen, there is a profound shortage of doctors who are embedded in the data science teams. Medicine is just so complex, and there's just so much going on, including the stuff that doesn't get recorded in this data set, that it's so important to have a doctor or a medical professional embedded. In fact, I would, in my ideal dream kind of healthcare lab, I would have the data scientist working in the hospital somewhere in this like adjunct little annex of the emergency room, and popping out from time to time to talk to doctors and figuring out, and asking questions. There's a mindset out there in the industry that I think it's I don't want to be too critical, because I think the industry needs to be economical. It needs to be, we need to figure out how to build products quickly. But at the same time, the mindset is that in order to create healthcare AI, all you need is a data set and a group of data scientists, and that's not true. I think that you need to have that constant medical input in order to make this a really high quality solution.
Yeah, in some ways the question is, how do you create iterative processes in development that don't interfere with patient care, don't get in the way of patient care, and yet capture what really happens between the health professional and the patient. At the same time, maintaining privacy, confidentiality, and the kind of sacred trust that should be built between that health professional and the patient. That is very, very difficult to do. I can't point to any one system that has done it well. And when you don't do it, you create ethical problems as well as problems in accuracy, objectivity, and all the factors that make for a good algorithm.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's important. Perhaps as the field matures, we'll see more of that. You would actually have more high quality products. The field is clearly maturing. There is a lot more clinical trials happening where people are getting randomized to receive some kind of a medical AI therapeutic, kind of a digital therapeutics, I think it's called. So that is happening. There's a lot more testing of the algorithm. There's a lot of FDAs being involved in actually certifying and licensing certain algorithms. So we are seeing a movement in the positive direction.
What are some of the other problems that you're seeing with how the algorithms are being built?
For me, the biggest problems are not on the specific techniques of AI, but that's perhaps because I don't really understand them as well as someone like Sasha, like Dr. Gutfraind, because that's his area of expertise, and more on the weighting of variables and the inclusion of variables. One thing that Sasha said earlier in this discussion that really struck me is that the real key is what are the variables that aren't there. That really concerns me as we go forward. You have to have this iterative process in order to get there, and you can't suffer from overconfidence or using these engines too quickly for individual patient care. You can use them more quickly for noticing trends, for analytics in general, for determining guidelines, but you really can't use them too quickly for individual patient care.
Yeah, I have to agree, and I hope that we are going to kind of steadily move towards a place where these algorithms will become more validated and more accountable. I think that I see a lot of problems. There's sort of technical problems and there's ethical problems, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. And I could probably come up with like a long list of issues that bother me sometimes. Now I do want to say that there's to quote Keynes, I think that was his quote. He said that the difference between economics and ethics is that ethics tells you how the world should be and economics tells you how it is. So the point here is, I think no system is perfectly ethical, but our goal should be to try to figure out how to move in that direction. There's a variety of problems that can be found in the current generation of algorithms. One issue is the whole black box nature of the algorithms. A lot of the times, the algorithms simply produce an output. And when they produce an output, then it's hard for the people, the users, to decide how to make sense of it. It's hard for users to understand if there could be a problem affecting the algorithm. It's been called the paradox of automation, where if you have a system that's too automated and manages itself, it leads to a variety of problems to the users. But certainly, we have algorithms right now that simply produce a probability, say a probability of somebody experiencing a heart attack, some probability of somebody getting readmitted, and these algorithms don't explain why that is happening, and that's troubling because the algorithms could make mistakes, the algorithms could use the wrong data set. There might be some special circumstances in every case that are affecting these predictions. And what we need to be at a place where we are creating this glass box algorithms rather than black box algorithms. With glass box algorithms, the professionals who are ultimately in charge should be able to see and make sense of the output. They should be able to see which variables are driving the prediction and if it makes sense to them in the given context, in a given patient. So that's one problem. I hope I have more time, but I can go on and on. I mean, one of the biggest issues that bothers me is the whole issue of consent. Traditional medical ethics, as the way I read it, is the fact that assumes that people whose data is being used have consented to their data being used. That's what we do when we do clinical trials. But that's not something that typically happens when we build AI. We are generally assuming consent from patients, assuming consent to use their clinical data for building AI. It troubles me a little bit because nobody gets hurt when that happens, but there is a sense that the patients have not consented to their data being used, and I think we need to address that.
And in fact, in Europe, they are addressing that differently than America, are they not?
I think that what's happening in Europe, that there is this general data protection regulation that allows users to somehow own their data and ask for the data to be withdrawn. I think that definitely adds a little bit of that approval and consent element.
Right, and that's not even a question in America yet.
Yeah, there's no question that the European model right now is looking at these issues much more stringently in terms of confidentiality and privacy, not just in healthcare, but throughout what I'll call the internet universe, if I can call it that. And there are real serious ethical issues to be used here, to be thought about. Let me use as a metaphor, as a comparable, the whole issue of Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks, her cells were used to create HeLa cells, which is an immortal cell line used in scientific research. It's the oldest one. And it was actually first derived 1951 from cervical cancer cells taken from Ms. Lacks, a patient who died of cancer. And for a long, long time, people didn't even know about Henrietta Lacks. It was really, even though it was her cells, it was, and in a sense, there's a sense I feel that she should have ownership of these cells. And it's created a lot of dilemmas. The family has, in more recent years, gotten involved. There was a book written about it. How do we relate that now to the individual data points being contributed by each patient, by each person, when their personal data goes into a massive database? We've got to think about that long and hard. For me, I am a strong believer in the uniqueness of every single individual and the autonomy of every individual. That gets harmed if we don't think about the implications and how we manage all this.
I completely agree, and I think it's a really great analogy with the last story. In both cases, we have a situation where the patient is not harmed by using their data or their tissue, but in both cases there is a kind of a gap in consent. There is a feeling that we are somehow doing stuff that we are not supposed to be doing. I think it's a real problem. I bring it up to my friends and family, and I get a mixture of responses. Some people say that because the data is anonymized, that's okay. But I personally, I don't think it's okay. The reason it's not okay is because healthcare data is very intrusive. And it's kind of some of the most confidential things that a person does is talk to their doctor. And now we are kind of saying that it's okay to collect any data whatsoever, as long as it's anonymized. I don't think that I would agree to have like sensors installed in my house, just because I knew that my data would be anonymized. I would not agree. And of course that brings up the whole question of hacking and breaches, which happen. Anonymized data sets are not truly anonymized. With enough information it's possible to de-anonymize data sets. And there's been many cases of data breaches. We are kind of in a danger zone. I think that if you're talking about solutions, I think that we do need give patients. This is just a personal opinion, but I think we do need to give patients the ability to withdraw from data sets. And I think we also need to implement like a much more severe controls on those data sets, technical controls to protect them against breaches. There is wonderful technologies out there, such as differential privacy tools, such as new forms of encryption, synthetic data, that could really protect the data sets much more than we are doing now.
One of the questions I have is there's now certainly discussion out there that the use of blockchain technology may allow for more individual control. I certainly would like to learn more about whether that is a potential, because anything that gives more individual control is something that we should evaluate, pursue in a real way.
Definitely, and I think that most people would be very happy to have their data used for medical research, but I just think that we just need to ask them, and I think they will say yes.
Yes.
So let's talk about solutions. How do we make technology serve healthcare rather than interfere with it?
I don't know the solutions. I do know that we have to slow down. We can't rush headlong into these kinds of analytics and into these kinds of decision trees and decision algorithms without first stopping and thinking about these things and testing. I'm struck by how quickly we are moving in these directions, often without taking the time to think through all the implications and all the unanticipated problems in a rigorous enough manner.
Yeah, for me, I think a big part of the solution is just having more of that interdisciplinary collaboration. We need to have the doctors next to the data scientists, next to the patients. That's where you can really make an impact. That's where you can have all the parties understand each other's concerns and build great solutions. That's how we do it.
This does differ from those people who are out there who are making the case that all of medicine should be changed to have artificial intelligence systems be integral and be embedded in all medical decision making. That concerns me. It concerns me because, again, I don't know that we've thought it through and that we understand all of the unanticipated questions. We know, and we discussed this on a previous podcast, that you can make bias mistakes when you're just going by the data. We know there's wonderful research out there about life context, which doesn't have good databases, and how that dramatically affects healthcare and the results of healthcare. And by life context, I mean emotions, financial status, family situation, religion, everything that goes on in your life other than the disease. And we have to make sure that we evaluate all of this fully, always while taking care to keep individual privacy, confidentiality, and autonomy clearly in focus.
So normally for drugs, there are extensive clinical trials before it rolls out to wide use. So how could innovators implement clinical testing or the equivalent in AI systems?
There are clearly issues in drug testing that are now comparable, because even in drug development, we're getting to be much quicker in the cycle time, and there are complaints that potential solutions for people with very bad illness are not being brought to market quickly enough. And you do get people saying we've got to overhaul that process to get things more quickly. Yet there's always a balance. The balance is that if you move too quickly, you clearly will create problems that you didn't anticipate. I think, again, going to the comparable situation of drug development, one of the things in drug development that's being talked about is the fact that we've probably underemphasized ongoing studies once a drug comes to market. In that way, I do think that we have to mirror drug development up front and get different types of studies for these algorithms early in the process. But then with algorithms, it's even more important to really study once it comes to market and be willing to change, pull, in other words, delete, and not use a certain algorithm if it proves to be problematic.
I think that there is a lot of potential here. Certainly, we can absolutely test algorithms in the setting of a clinical trial. But more than that, and I think speaking to Alan's points about ongoing surveillance, this is much easier to do with algorithms. You know, with an algorithm, it is a relatively simple thing to build a feedback loop where we know what happens to the patient when they receive a certain algorithmic prediction. Let's suppose we have an algorithm that makes a diagnosis based on some radiology image. We can figure out, we can ask kind of a follow-up screen where the radiologist says, I agree, or no, I think this makes no sense. And we can collect data to figure out if the algorithm is doing the right thing. A lot of the time what happens now is that we kind of build an algorithm and just push it out there without knowing how it's actually being used and how it's kind of what's happening when it interacts with patients and doctors. But there is a technical solution, is having that feedback loop coming back to developers to track how the algorithm is doing. This is something that's routinely done in, for example, online advertisement, where, whenever we go to Google and we see the results of a search, somebody clicks on the link, Google knows which link we clicked on. I think that this is something that we can roll out to medicine and actually figure out how our algorithms are doing, and if we need to make a course correction, make a course correction. This is where really technology offers a solution. As long as we're just aware of that issue, the need to have a feedback loop.
I agree.
Is it okay for algorithms to use attributes like gender or race?
I think that it is okay to use gender or race. However, I'm not a lawyer, and it's a very, very important question, because in practice, when we are data scientists, one of the most important things we want to know about a patient is there are a couple of protected attributes. We want to know how old the patient is, what's her gender, sometimes the race could also be meaningful. And this is different from situations, other industries where a lot of this information is strictly confidential and cannot be used for making insurance decisions. In my mind, and I'm just speaking mostly from kind of a technically ethical point of view, not from a legal point of view, I think it is okay in situations where the algorithm is designed to benefit the patient. So, for example, if we are building an algorithm that tries to predict if the patient is going to have a heart event, knowing their age, gender, and race, other information could be very important, and this could make the algorithm a lot better. It is more questionable whether this is okay to do if we are trying to make a financial decision about the patient. That's where there is more of a gray zone, and this is where you would need to talk to your lawyer. I would like to also point out that there was this interesting study about these attributes, which found that it's sometimes not very important to include these attributes because they allow the algorithm to compensate for biases that might be happening in other variables. The study that I'm quoting looked at high school scores and whether it's okay to use the person's race in an algorithm that uses high school scores to predict whether the person is going to succeed in college. Well, you can imagine that somebody who has a low ACT score and comes from a disadvantaged background, that actually prompts them to more success in college. So that having that background information from potentially even their race could actually become a meaningful correction to that. But it's really a case-by-case basis, and I think a lot of data scientists don't appreciate just how much bias and how much disparities are there in the data sets that we use, and we have to be very careful and sensitive about that.
Race and gender is an important component in healthcare decision making. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, and my risk for certain diseases is higher than for other diseases. And based on those risks, when you deal with the uncertainty, which is how I started out talking about uncertainty, it helps to determine that uncertainty and where things lie on that equation. What it is goes back to more of, are we using and are we correcting, as Sasha said, for misleading variables. I do come back, however, to saying that it's more a matter of autonomy, who owns it, and people understanding what they are sharing, what they are giving when they allow their data to be used. And I do think that's a very important component that we can never lose sight of.
What are some of the biases found in healthcare data, and how do they affect AI?
The biases, I believe, are biases of omission. They are biases that we don't have complete information. They are biases that relate to some of the factors that I mentioned earlier in not knowing what's going on when a health professional meets with the patient, not knowing enough about what's going on in the person's home. I don't think the answer to that is a big brother type state where we know everything. I think the answer to that is smarter algorithms that correct, that acknowledge that lack of knowledge, if I can put it that way, and that we don't depend completely on the algorithms. I think the answer is in the issue of autonomy. At the same time, getting the right kind of data systems that can correct and that can take that into account. If I had to say what the real answer is, it's really humility on everyone's part, which seems to be hard to come by in today's world.
You mentioned, Alan, autonomy. So when you're talking about autonomy in this context, what are you describing specifically?
My data from 23andMe, for example, I allow it to be used for research. But someone has asked me that, and I'm involved. My data is, I allow all of my data to go into the database that the Scripps Translational Institute, for example, is using on health risks. But I made that choice. And those are the kind of choices that people have to make for each of these things. It can't be blanket. It can't be overwhelming. And we have to take the time to allow people to make that choice. I may do it for Scripps because I think that they will be using my data ethically. I may not want to allow it for another organization.
Yes. We should have algorithms that allow for the fact that some data is not entered, that you can actually say the patient declined to provide this information, and the algorithm should be able to cope with that. And I think it can.
Yes.
There is, it should not be the case that, like, in order to use an algorithm, you have to tell it everything about your medical history and your entire life. The algorithm should be able to kind of deal with the fact that the patient chooses not to provide certain information.
So to wrap up, do you foresee some of the ethical issues being addressed in the future, or will algorithms always be inherently troubled by ethical concerns?
I think they always should be ethical concerns. That is the only way to make sure that ethics are always addressed. There's not a finish line here. This is an ongoing struggle, and as it should well be.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ethics will not going to go away. And I think it's incumbent on us to become kind of ethically equipped as data scientists. It's incumbent on us to be ethically equipped to understand these issues and do our best to solve them, to address them, to really build trust in that system. I think that's a lot of the reasons why people are hesitant about adopting AI. Patients are hesitant about adopting AI. Administrators are hesitant about adopting AI because they feel, sometimes rightfully so, that these systems are troubled. And I think we need to solve that. We need to build the ethics into the AI.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Spiro and Dr. Gutfraind, and we'll see you next time.